Hey folks, today's video is all about knives. How to select the knife that's going to work the best for you for your particular application. What type of steel is best, what type of handle configuration, blade style, all in one. So let me get set up and we'll get started. Okay, well let's get started. What I've got here is just a sample selection of some of the knives that I have and have used over the years. When I select a knife, there's some obvious things to look for. What are you going to use the knife for? What type of environment are you going to use it in? And your physical attributes, how big are your hands, how small are your hands, what do you particularly like? Some of those things may seem obvious, but I am very fortunate in being able to have as many knives as I do. I don't even know how many I have. I've probably about 100, maybe less than that. But anyway, I'm very fortunate in that I have been able to use and test a lot of knives, and especially lately. The task that you are trying to accomplish with your knife is going to affect your knife selection. That may seem obvious, but I mean, these are some of the things that you want to look at or think about before you purchase a knife. Where do you live? Do you live in the desert or do you live in the rainforest? What are your woods or area like? Not all of these knives will accomplish the same task as easily as others. So, for instance, if I want to just go out and make a spoon or a bowl, I would get a knife like this. This is a spoon knife. I think it's made by Mora, but this knife is going to accomplish a task much better than this knife. This knife is going to be able to process game better than this knife. Now that's a kind of an extreme example, but you understand where I'm going with that. Sometimes folks, when they see me review a knife or see others review a knife, they say, well, you just reviewed a knife last week and you said that one was awesome. Why do you need another knife? Or now you're saying this knife is awesome as well. How do we know which one is truly the best knife? Go look in your kitchen. How many knives do you have in your kitchen? It never fails to amaze me when folks get kind of upset that you've got more than one knife. Go look in your kitchen. Those are just for prepping food, and yet you have, what, I think I've probably got 6 or 7 different styles of knives in my little butcher block, in the knife block or whatever. So those knives, the little paring knife is going to accomplish a task better than a huge butcher type knife, and vice versa. So let's just dive right into it. Right here I've got a cold steel knife. I bought this one for a class I was thinking about taking. This is a stainless steel knife. It's a small blade, relatively small blade. It's a stainless steel knife because I was going to use it as a dive knife in the ocean. It's got a nice Kydex sheath. Sheaths are something that can be discussed even in another video, because those are, it's a component to the knife. That's a very valuable component, obviously, but that's a separate topic as far as sheaths go, as far as I'm concerned. So the thickness of this knife, looking at this knife, I can tell that if I wanted to, pry some sort of shellfish off of a rock, it's got a decent enough thickness to it that shouldn't be a problem. Now obviously if I abuse it, the tip will break or whatever, but it just depends on what you're going to use it for. The handle, I can tell just by the material of the handle that it's not going to be slippery when it's wet. It's a little thin for my taste, the handle, but I'm not going to be doing hardcore bushcrafting with this knife. That's not what I bought it for. I bought it as a dive knife. So the fact that it's got a thinner handle really doesn't affect me that much, because I'm not going to be using it for hours on end. A knife like this has a beefier handle, so it's more comfortable when I'm doing feather sticks or batoning or whatever. So this one I could use for hours and hours. This is 01 steel. It's going to rust. If I strap it to my leg or strap it to my hip and go diving in the ocean, this thing is going to get really rusty really fast. It's not made to be that type of a knife. It's made for more of a wood processor, all-around type bushcraft survival type knife. This one, once again, the thickness is quite thick. It's a different material. I'm not worried about prying with this knife. For a little bit. I mean, you know, obviously I don't pry with my knives too much, but if I need to dig into a stump and maybe just pry off a little piece of punk wood or separate wood or something, I'm not talking, you know, using it like a crowbar. It has more resiliency or bendability as opposed to a stainless steel knife. It's not as brittle. Depends on what you're going to do with your knife, like I said. Here we have a smaller type knife. Look at the blade style there. This would be an awesome skinner. Your area can determine what size of knife even you can carry. I can carry this knife with me. This is the Genesis. I can carry this knife with me all day long up in my area and nobody's going to say anything. I can carry any of my knives basically in my area and nobody's going to say anything. If you live in New York City, obviously not New York City because you're probably not even allowed a pocket knife there, but you're not going to want to strap something like this to your hip. It's just your EDC or your everyday carry is going to depend on your location. All right, my suggestions for someone just getting started. We all have a budget and not everyone is as fortunate as some folks to have a lot of different knives to try out. What's my suggestion? My suggestion is get a $12 Mora, or at least handle a $12 Mora. Buy one. I would get one. No knife collection is complete without a Mora, in my opinion. So this is not the standard Mora. I'm talking about the wood-handled Mora. It fits in your handle good, or in your hand good. It's a high carbon steel, so it is going to remain sharp and get sharp much easier than some of the very hard steels, like some of the stainless steels. If you are not super experienced with sharpening a knife, or in my opinion, well, nowadays the stainless steels are getting better and better, so you can obtain a very good edge on them, just like you can with the high carbon steels. But in my opinion, I prefer a high carbon steel. But if you're having trouble or you're not super experienced with sharpening a knife, a high carbon steel knife is going to sharpen up much easier for you than a stainless steel knife. Some folks, when they will swear by a Mora, and Moras are good knives. And some folks will say, why do you need, I don't even remember what this one is, probably a couple $100 knife, okay? Why do you need to upgrade or purchase a couple $100 knife when this knife will accomplish almost all the same tasks that this one will? Well, I'll tell you, this knife has a rat tail tang. A rat tail tang just simply means that the steel that's in the handle is just a thin tail-like piece of steel that's in this handle. That normally isn't a problem if you're going to just do some light cutting duty with it or just light type work. In my opinion, when I go out into the woods, I want something that has a huge piece of steel in the handle, almost as big as the blade. Folks swear by Moras. I do too. They're great knives, but I've seen the handles come off. If you're out in the woods and you really need that knife and your handle comes off, suddenly the $200 knife kind of looks a little more appealing. That's just my opinion. This handle is much beefier in my hand than this. This is still a comfortable handle, but using it hard, a fatter handle, in my opinion, works way better for me. If you have smaller hands, like my daughter, this is a perfect knife for my daughter. Perfect. She doesn't need some monstrosity of a knife. Her stature is such that she doesn't need or can't wield a big knife like that. So there's a lot of factors that go into knife selection. It's very similar to when folks talk about a particular person, they'll say he's a jack of all trades, master of none. If you're trying to get the one tool option, you're going to get just that. You're going to get one tool that accomplishes most tasks satisfactorily, but you're not going to have the awesome knife for that particular task. Take a look at this knife. Is this knife going to be the knife that I'm going to pick up if I want to carve a spoon? Or maybe even, it'll do feather sticks, but it's not like the perfect knife to do a feather stick. Is it the perfect knife to make a bow drill set? No. But this is a heck of a game processor. Take a look at the shape of the blade. It's basically like a deboning knife or a game processing type knife, and a fantastic skinner. High carbon steel. It's got a nice blaze orange handle so you can find it when you set it down. It's got rough plastic so that when you get your hands all bloody, it's not going to slip. So both very good, inexpensive knives, but for very different purposes. What are you going to do with your knife? Are you going to take it hunting? If you're going to take it hunting, something like, and that's all that primarily you're going to use your knife for, something like this might suit your needs much better than, say, I always keep my knives in plastic wrapped in grease because most of mine are high carbon. But obviously this is going to process your game much better than something like this. Now this for me is just a decorative piece. I put the handle on it. Once again, it's a rat tail tang. One more thing about the rat tail tang is you cannot pin your handles to the tang of the knife. So these plastic ones don't have the issue quite like the wood ones do, but the wood ones will slip off. I've seen it. I've seen folks super happy about getting their first Mora and they go out and use it a little bit. And I'm not talking abusing it. I'm not talking about beating it through, whatever. I'm talking about just, normal average use, and the handle came off. Like I said, if you're out in the woods and that happens, you're going to be pretty bummed. So what do I look for? Really depends on what I want the knife for. Let's just talk about bushcraft knives. Bushcraft knives, in my opinion, a lot of folks get too big of a knife. Something around this size, I'm going to say about a 3-inch blade, 3 to 4-inch blade, is a perfect woodworking / bushcraft type knife. When you get up into the 5 and 6-inch category, I consider that more of a survival knife, a one-tool option. With a knife like this large, I need to supplement this with something like this, a little pocket knife. It's pretty tough to beat this combination right here. A larger, good, wood processing, heavy duty type knife in conjunction with a smaller knife that this I can process really small game, fish, a lot of different things. Will this knife do it? Absolutely, but it's going to be more cumbersome. It's going to be harder to achieve the same tasks that I can achieve with this knife. Personally, I like high carbon steel, whether that be 1095, 01, or right now my absolute favorite is A2 steel. If you live in a saltwater type environment or around saltwater, you may be wanting to get stainless steel. Stainless steel is going to be more brittle. I personally do not like batoning with stainless steel because I'm scared to death it's going to break on me. Maybe that's just because of my experiences with earlier types of stainless steel like this. In my opinion, if you're going to purchase a belt knife, a fixed blade knife, it should be able to baton wood. Now, batoning is kind of a little bit of a controversial subject, and for a long time I used to think that the only reason I needed to baton wood was to make a bow drill set. And that's true in my area. But in very wet, moist environments, or if it's been raining like crazy at my house, it's hard to find flammable material unless you baton and get to the center of your piece of wood. Now I'm lucky I've got birch, so birch bark is a huge resource, but if you don't have birch and it's soaking wet out, you're going to have to baton to get to the center of the piece of wood. Now you can, a lot of folks say, well, just bring an axe. What if you don't have an axe? Also, I find batoning smaller types of wood to get to the heartwood, to the drier pieces of wood. I have way more control batoning my knife as opposed to using a hatchet or an axe to accomplish that same task. Sure, an axe is used for, I can split down, if I have a big chunk, a big log or whatever, I can split it down into manageable size pieces, and then, if everything works out perfect, I can maybe make kindling with my axe. But as far as being very controlled, perfect size diameter sticks that I want to get to accomplish my fire, batoning is the way to go in my opinion. In order to determine whether the knife is going to work for you, handle-wise, basically you're going to have to just go to a knife store or a knife shop, like a gun show type thing, and just pick up a knife and just see how it feels in your hand. A little bit of a tip, and that's going to be hard to do because a lot of times you have to actually use the knife to determine whether or not it's going to give you a hot spot. Something that I like to do is I like to pick up my knife and squeeze the living heck out of it. If it's uncomfortable, when I have a death grip on it, it's going to be uncomfortable when I'm trying to do feather sticks or do whatever for it with it. Take for instance, a lot of folks carry multi-tools, and so do I. They're a very valuable tool, but bushcrafting with this type of knife, with this type of handle, is going to get very uncomfortable in the long run. This knife here is a throwing knife. Now, maybe not super practical, but it's fun. But mostly what I want to show you is the paracord wrapped handle. This knife here used to have a paracord wrapped handle until I had a knife maker put scales on it. This knife is a pleasure to use now compared to what it used to be. The paracord wrapped handle gets old real fast. It's super uncomfortable. I don't care what the knife is made out of. If your handle isn't correct for your hand, you're not going to use it, or it's going to suck to try to use it. It's going to give you hot spots. It's just going to be super uncomfortable. So the handle is just as important as the blade style and material that it's made out of. I have found, for me, that this knife here is about the best I can get to accomplish every task that I want to accomplish when I'm out in the woods. It has a beautifully shaped handle, a large enough handle to fill my hand. The blade thickness is about perfect. I think this is an 1/8 inch steel. There's quite a bit of difference between the thicknesses, even when you just go up, a 1/16 or a little bit more in steel. This knife is way heavier. It's still a good knife, but it's way heavier, and some of the fine carving tasks are going to be more difficult than with a thinner blade. Also, I find that with the thinner blade, and this is probably pretty obvious, but I mean with a thinner blade you're going to be able to get your knife sharper. The angle between the back of the knife and the blade, you don't have to shave off as much material. That's a lot of times why they go with a Scandi grind, is because you can shave off material rather quickly and then get your blade thinner before you even start making the edge. I hope that makes sense. I mean, it would be the same thing as, you get a huge chunk of steel like this, you're already at a disadvantage because the back of your knife is quite a bit thicker in relationship to the blade. So, I mean, I hope I'm making sense there. It's basically like taking a triangle with your hand. If your knife is shaped like this, it's going to be, it's going to be a great splitter and be great for a lot of things. It's going to be a resilient edge, but it may not get quite as sharp as, say, a knife that has an edge profile like this. And to illustrate that, I mean, this is extremes, but the difference between this Mora at like a 1/16 inch steel and this knife here where it's like a 1/4 inch steel. Preference-wise, I'm leaning towards thinner knives nowadays. I like an 1/8 inch or so steel as opposed to these huge monster ginormous knives nowadays. And I look for a high carbon steel knife because I know it's going to be more pliable is kind of the wrong word, but almost that way. It's gonna have some resiliency or some give to it rather than being brittle like a lot of the stainless steels are. I'm not afraid to baton this. I want my knife to be able to baton through a piece of oak. Am I going to go out and baton through a piece of oak? No. But I know that if it can handle that, there is nothing that I'm going to throw at this knife that it can't handle, because I'm not going to abuse it like batoning it through a piece of oak. But that one test will shows me just how strong this knife is and what it's capable of doing. All right, folks. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little discussion. There's a lot to discuss when it comes to knives, and a lot of it is personal preference, but then also a lot of it is, I mean, there are certain rules, obviously, that are a foundation for selecting a knife, and a lot of it has to do with you and your preferences, your area, your body style, a lot of different things. So there's a lot of knives out there. Like I said, I recommend buying a Mora because it's about 12 bucks, I think. And once you use this knife and mess around with it, you'll know what you like and what you dislike about this knife. And so when you're ready to upgrade to something like this, you'll already know, or you'll have an idea of what works best for you. All right, folks, take care.